Okay, moving on to chapter 25, again focusing just on some of the highlights from the PowerPoint. So in the PowerPoint, I've gone through past all of the stuff that just kind of went over the generic anatomy stuff that doesn't need to explain, but there were a few things I wanted to point out. So for example, your saliva isn't just kind of a moisturizer in the mouth to help, for example, binding your bolus, so the digested food that's been chewed up in your mouth, and help it to swallow. It also includes some enzymes, so as you're chewing, you're breaking down some of the foods early. So you have your salivary amylase, which helps to digest starch. Then you also have lingual lipase, so your LIP for lipid, and then ACE is your enzyme. That helps to start breaking down the fat early on in the process. It also includes some of your mucus, so helps to lubricate the mass of food, so your bolus binds it together, helps it move down your esophagus more smoothly. And then there's also some immune protection. So you have lysozyme, which is another enzyme that helps to kill bacteria, as well as immunoglobulin A, so it's an antibody that prevents bacteria from growing. So this helps to block your body from anything that's been ingested, help to start the immune process as early as possible before you even get to your tonsils, which is the lymphatic tissue that guards against your inhaled and ingested pathogens. So kind of like a front door helping of your immune system. And then lastly, some electrolytes that help with the solution being hypotonic. So just helping keeping your water balance in the saliva correctly. So after you've chewed your food and your saliva's helped moisten it and gets it ready to be swallowed, there's 3 phases of swallowing. So you have your first phase, which is oral, which is under voluntary control. So this is your muscles that you're controlling to swallow the food towards the back of your throat. So forming of the bolus, so it's all of the bundled up food together. Then the food will accumulate in the oropharynx in front of the epiglottis. So over here, you have this shared space where you have your breathing pathway as well as your digestive pathway. So you have breathing going here and then down into your trachea, and then your oral pathway for digestion. So from your oral cavity, from the mouth, and then swallowing back behind this epiglottis. So this little flat piece here, which as you're swallowing will fold over and block the airway so that you're not getting food into your trachea. So your food will slide over that epiglottis and into your esophagus. So that's that last point. The epiglottis tips posteriorly, so to block off that airway from having food going into the wrong tube. So moving on to the involuntary phase. So this is with input from your central nervous system. There's a whole pattern of muscle constriction to continue to make sure that that food is going to go into your esophagus, so preventing the food from re-entering into the mouth as well as entering into the navel cavity. So basically making sure that it stays into the back of the throat and goes down into your esophagus. So your last phase is completely in the esophagus. This is also called your esophageal phase. It is marked by a type of movement called peristalsis. So this is this involuntary wave of muscle contractions where the muscles will squeeze and push the bolus down into the stomach. And so this also helps, for example, with patients when they're lying down and they're close to completely being flat. It helps them to be able to swallow regardless of the body position. So even if they're laying back, they're still able to eat and still be able to rest. Eventually you get down to your stomach. Here there's a sphincter muscle that controls what goes in and out the stomach. That sphincter muscle will then relax and allow the bolus to enter into the stomach. So now we're in the stomach. Its job is to mechanically break up food. So as the stomach is churning, those smooth muscles helping to contract and move the food, mix it around with all your digestive juices. So we have more enzymes. We also have your hydrochloric acid to help break food down. That mixing the bolus into the gastric juices of the stomach creates what's called chyme, which is your next phase. So you go from food to bolus, and now we're into chyme now that we're in the stomach. So it's your semi-digested food combined with all your gastric juices in the stomach. So typically we've kind of learned as we're growing up that stomach digests the food, but it's actually just a part of the process. Most of your digestion occurs in the small intestines. So your stomach really helps to break it down, but to finally get it down to its individual monomers or its individual building blocks that can be absorbed into the body, it occurs in your small intestines. So the inside of your stomach is lined with what's called gastric pits. So in our little picture here, these deep folds within the lumen of the stomach. And in those gastric pits, you have 3 different types of cells. And each of these cells have their own different functions. So with those cells, you have the first one, your mucus cells. So they help to provide a mucus coating for the stomach to help protect it from your digestive secretions, so the acid and other enzymes that would break down your food. Also prevents it from, that mucus layer prevents those gastric juices from breaking down the stomach. So some people who have stomach ulcers is because they have limited protection from the mucus that should be coating their cells, and so those digestive those digestive juices, so your hydrochloric acid and other enzymes, are able to make contact with the stomach and start to break it down. So you end up having a breakdown of the inside lining of your stomach. Other type of cell are your regenerative stem cells. So again, your inside of your stomach area has a lot of activity. And so those cells are eventually going to die off and need to be replaced. So that's those jobs of those cells. Then the last cell is the parietal cells. Their job is to secrete hydrochloric acid, as well as the hormone ghrelin, which helps to trigger the hunger sensation in the body. So I'm going to focus just on the job of making the hydrochloric acid. Oops. Oh, sorry. I missed these other 2 cells, sorry. The chief cells, which help to secrete gastric lipase as well as pepsinogen. So lipase to break down your fats, as well as pepsinogen to break down proteins. So think peptide bonds are broken down by this pepsinogen enzyme. So the pep part kind of goes with the peptide bond. Then last type of cell, your enteroendocrine cells, which help to secrete hormones and other messengers to regulate digestion. So just making sure all the activity for digestion keeps going the way it should. Okay, so inside your stomach to help break down food, you have these gastric juices, which are produced by these gastric glands in these pits. So it's mostly a mixture of water, your hydrochloric acid, which is produced by the parietal cells, which I'll cover in a second, and then pepsin, which helps to break down proteins. Your pepsin also is activated at the acidic environment in the stomach. So its preferred pH is roughly 1.5 or 2. So very acidic, low end of the pH scale. Okay, so in chapter 22, we went through respiration and talked about the carbonic acid reaction. So here it is again. So we have our carbon dioxide mixes with water, and it's helped along to become your carbonic acid with the help of your carbonic anhydrase enzyme, creating your carbonic acid. Then that carbonic acid then dissociates into your bicarbonate ion as well as your hydrogen ion. So in your parietal cells, that hydrogen ion is pumped out of the cells into the gastric lumen, so in the open space of your stomach, by a hydrogen potassium ATPase pump. So it's a pump that uses ATP to power the pump, so it needs energy to do so. It's pumping out hydrogen and pulling in potassium. Okay. The bicarbonate ion is exchanged for chloride. So again, your chloride shift. That chloride is then pumped out into the lumen of the gastric gland, so in the inside of the stomach, where it combines with hydrogen to form hydrochloric acid. So here's your hydrogen, here's the chloride that was pulled into the cell when it was exchanged for the bicarbonate ion. Those two ions will combine together to form the hydrochloric acid, which is a very strong acid to help break down the foods. So when this bicarbonate ion is exchanged out for the chloride one, it is pumped into the blood vessels, which causes a increase in pH in the blood called an alkaline tide. So the blood becomes more alkaline or less acidic due to all the bicarbonate ions in it. So it's kind of like dumping a bunch of baking soda into your blood, where it just kind of counters the acidity. So if you remember your those little volcano experiments you used to do, like when you're a little kid and you had the vinegar and you mix it with the baking soda. So in our case, the more slightly acidic blood being slightly neutralized a bit by the bicarbonate coming from the exchange out of those parietal cells and into the blood vessels. So here's a picture version of this from your textbook. So first step, you get carbon dioxide from the blood, comes into the parietal cell, mixes with water. That mixing of those two molecules forms your carbonic acid. That carbonic acid then dissociates into your bicarbonate and your hydrogen ions. Hydrogen is then exchanged out of the parietal cell into your open lumen of your stomach, or lumen of the gastric gland, which can then be control its secretions into your open lumen of the stomach. So hydrogen out, potassium in. Your bicarbonate ion is exchanged for chloride through an antiport, so bicarbonate ion out, chloride from the blood in. That chloride ion is then just moved straight out into this open lumen space, where it will combine with the hydrogen ion from earlier that dissociated from the carbonic acid and combine together to make your stomach acid, which is hydrochloric acid. So in here, the bicarbonate ion, once it gets sent out into the blood vessels or into the blood, all of this bicarbonate, which is basically like baking soda, will neutralize some of the acidity in the blood, and as it's being pumped out into the blood, it causes what's called the alkaline tide, where it's this flow of more alkaline blood away from the stomach due to all the input of the bicarbonate ion. So your hydrochloric acid not only helps to break down your food, it also helps to activate some of your digestive enzymes. So pepsin to break down the proteins, as well as lingual lipase to break down lipids. Helps so to break down the connective tissues as well as plant cells wall. So this is how it breaks down the food to form your chyme. So breaking down whatever you've chewed up further into smaller molecules. It also helps to convert ingested ferric ions from your diet into ferrous ions, which are allowed to which can be absorbed. So we can't absorb the ferric ions, but we can absorb the ferrous ions. The ferrous ions are also used for making of your hemoglobin. And then lastly, very acidic environment. Therefore, it's hard for things to live in said environment. Again, necessary needing for the mucus layer of the stomach to help protect the stomach from the stomach acid inside the lumen of the stomach. So with all this high acid environment, anything that's ingested that's a pathogen can be destroyed by that hydrochloric acid. So inside your stomach, the gastric activity starts off being controlled by the brain. Then there's a gastric phase where the stomach controls itself. And then lastly, the intestinal phase where the intestines controls the digestion activity. So with the cephalic phase, it's due to sensory information coming in. So smell, taste, thought of food causes the input into the brain, causing salivation, causing the gastric juices to start flowing, in the possibility of you inputting food into your body and going ahead so it's ready to start digestion when that happens. So cephalic phase, you get your sensory information in, eventually stimulating the enteric nervous system, so the nervous system that controls your digestive system, and it causes the stimulation of gastric secretions. Next phase is the gastric phase, so now you've actually eaten food. It starts that phase, so now your food's been chewed up, swallowed as a bolus, now sent to the stomach where it's mixed together to form chyme. This is activated by the stretching of the stomach, so as the food enters into the stomach, causing the outside of the stomach to stretch, which therefore stimulates your enteric nervous system. Also helps to increase the pH of the stomach. So this should say increase the pH of its content. Sorry, I got cut off. So increasing of the gastric juices flowing so that you have more to mix with the food to help break down the food that was ingested. Then the last phase is your intestinal phase. So through different hormones as well as different nervous reflexes helps to release secretin. So as you have this high acidic environment in your stomach, and then as this chyme starts to flow into your small intestines, it needs to be neutralized. So going from a more acidic pH to more neutral pH, so closer to a pH of 7, also causes the release of cholecystokinin, which will then cause the release of bile, which helps to break down fat, as well as pancreas, that has its own functions for dealing, for example, with glucose. So as your stomach is churning up your food, breaking it down, it doesn't just automatically just start flowing into your small intestine. Since I mentioned earlier where all your digestion happens in your small intestine, so you need to have time for the process to break down those larger molecules into their individual monomers or individual subunits. So gastric secretion declines, which helps to limit the chyme that enters the duodenum, which is the first section, as your stomach flows into your small intestines. It also causes the enteroendocrine cells to release glucose-dependent insulin-trophic peptide. So it's dependent on the presence of glucose to release insulin so that your body can absorb the sugar or the glucose that was in whatever you ate. So as your small intestines breaks down the food and absorbs those nutrients into the bloodstream, they are then carried to the liver, where your liver actually has a bunch of different jobs. So it helps to also absorb nutrients from whatever you ate. In between meals, it helps to break down your glycogen to release glucose. So since you're not bringing in glucose into the body from food, it breaks down those glycogen storage molecules so that you can release glucose. Also helps to remove and degrade different hormones, toxins, bile pigments, and drugs. So whatever was in your stomach to help either break down the food, so for example your bile, as well as whatever you've taken. So if you've taken some of your medications that have to be taken every 4 hours, it's because your liver clears them out. So it has to be retaken so that your body can still have the medication inside of it to have an effect. Also helps to get rid of any toxins, so whatever you, again, ingest in, help to prevent that from flowing around into the rest of your body, since your blood takes its first stop into the liver after the stomach. Then it also has a bunch of secretions into the blood, which you guys need to see better. So albumin, lipoprotein, clotting factors, angiotensin, which you can't see, but helps to help the body with, for example, absorbing of your different lipids, and helping just making other factors that have nothing to do with digestion, but they're necessary. So, for example, angiotensin, which you can't see, but it's the one that's like down here. That one helps to regulate your blood pressure, clotting factors to help when you have an injury, and then albumin, which is your protein inside of the blood plasma. So a major portion of your lipid digestion also is from bile, which is released from the gallbladder. So here underneath your liver. The bile that is released into the duodenum of the small intestines helps to aid in fat digestion and absorption. And after your chyme has then moved into your small intestines, and that's where it'll mix with the bile and help with the fat digestion and breaks it down, then eventually it goes into the large intestine, so small intestines moving into the large intestines, where there's bacteria that will break down the bile. So it metabolizes the bilirubin, which is from your bile, so it's the pigment in there, to urobilinogen, that contributes to the urine and poop color. So it ends up breaking it down into two different colors, the more yellow color for urine and then the more brown color for poop. So as your food is being digested into the small intestines and broken down into the monomers, what helps your small intestines be able to absorb the nutrients that you have taken into your body are due to the internal surface of the small intestine having a lot of folds inside of it. So you have these larger villi, which are the more finger-like folds, and then, you might not be able to see it too well. Let me just zoom in. The microvilli, which are on that brush border on those cells, helping to again increase the area for absorption, so allowing for your small intestines to be able to absorb absorb more of the nutrients that you have eaten. So for some enzymes, the last step in digestion happens in those microvilli, so that little brush along those cells. That's called contact digestion, where the chyme actually has to contact that brush border where those enzymes are located to have the final step of digestion. So as your your small intestines is digesting your food, it happens in a step called segmentation. So these 3 bars are your three of the same section of your small intestines, where you have your food and your different digestive juices. So some more of your enzymes help break down food in your small intestines. So increasing this, so the secretions, like for example, from your pancreas as well as from your gallbladder, entering into the small intestines, which needs to be mixed up with that chyme. So in this first stage during segmentation, where these little constrictions, where the small intestines just breaks down the food and helps to mix them together. So each of these stages, they're becoming more and more mixed. And they're not moving through the small intestines yet. They're just staying in that one location, mixing with the increased juices from the pancreas as well as your gallbladder to help with the digestion. So more digestive enzymes, as well as, for example, your bile. So mix them together, help to break down your food so it can be absorbed. And then after your chyme has been nearly fully digested, then peristalsis happens. So this is where you still have that squeezing motions, but it actually moves it across. So segmentation, same spot. Peristalsis is where it actually squeezes to move it down your small intestines and other other tubes of your digestion system. So even down your esophagus, through your small intestines and your large intestines. So this next one shows the peristalsis, where it's moving the food down, so constricting and pushing it along your small intestines to move it towards your large intestines, forming your migrating motor complex. So just migrating and pushing along the food along that path of the small intestines. So unlike your carbohydrates as well as your proteins, once they are broken down into their individual subunits and can be absorbed by the small intestine cells, your lipids, however, have to be broken down into smaller and smaller bits, so going from larger fat globules, eventually breaking down into your micelles. Those micelles are the packages that allow the fats to, so your free fatty acids, to also your monoglycerides, so your glycerol molecule attached to one fatty acid, is moved into your small intestine cells, and then your micelles can be reused after that. So inside your small intestines is where your free fatty acids and your monoglycerides are repackaged as triglycerides or phospholipids, which can be used to make the cell, or into cholesterol, or sorry, not into cholesterol, but cholesterol also can be inside that micelle and be taken into this into your small intestines. So take your fatty acid and your monoglyceride, make it into your triglyceride or your phospholipid, which can also be packaged with cholesterol into another vessel. So we went from micelle on the outside of the cell to a chylomicron on the inside of your small intestine. These chylomicrons are then packaged into secretory vesicles to be exited out the cell And with your lymphatic system having large enough holes to take up, for example, even whole cells, still large enough to take up those chylomicrons and therefore take them into the lymphatic system, eventually dropping them off into your bloodstream. So that picture just shows all your different nutrient digestions at the same time. So you have your carbohydrates in this column, proteins in this column, both of these being able to be absorbed into your small intestines and sent straight to your bloodstream. Then your lipids going through their breakdown process, absorbed using my cells, which have the parts of your triglyceride that have been broken down, which get resynthesized or repackaged, or resynthesized or remade into triglycerides in your small intestines, packaged into those chylomicrons, which are taken up by the lacteals in your lymphatic system, and then your lymphatic system will eventually take it into your bloodstream. So now at the last step, your small intestines have fully digested whatever you've eaten, so what's left over is just waste. So it gets sent to your large intestines to be converted into feces. So its job is to reabsorb the water and electrolytes, so that helps to compact the waste into your fecal matter. So it contains a bunch of stuff in there, again, stuff that wasn't either digested, or as, for example, the sloughed epithelial cells, as those cells get sloughed off of the inside lining of your digestive tract. So even after, you've digested the small intestines, there's still, cells that, at the end of the small intestines as well as in the large intestines that will slough off or, break off, excuse me, and then become part of your feces. So last step, feces become more compacted due to the reabsorption of water and electrolytes. So if you're dehydrated because you're not drinking enough water and your body's trying to reabsorb as much water as possible, end up being constipated because your body is pulling that water from your fecal matter. Opposite can happen if you have something's going on with your body and your body, for example, maybe Taco Tuesday didn't agree with you, and your digestive system just wants to get rid of everything that's inside of it. So end up with diarrhea because your large intestines doesn't have enough time to reabsorb the water. So all that waste is moving through the large intestine too fast. And so you end up with loose fecal material or diarrhea. Okay, so eventually you have these different contractions to promote the water and salt to be absorbed as you're moving the fecal matter through your large intestines. So there's the lighter contractions of your large intestines, and then your mass movements, which is your stronger contractions, help to push your fecal matter through your large intestines.